The flames were already licking at the second-story windows when Marcus pulled up the house on Maple Street, his heart hammering against his ribs like it always did during these calls. 23 years fighting fires, and he still felt that same surge of adrenaline mixed with terror every single time. But tonight was different. Tonight, as he leaped from the truck and pulled on his gear, something in his gut told him this fire would change everything. The screams coming from inside the house cut through the roar of the flames like broken glass. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling for help from somewhere deep within the inferno. Marcus didn't wait for backup. He never did. While his crew worked on establishing water lines, he was already charging to the front door, his breathing apparatus hissing in his ears, the heat hitting him like a physical wall. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see his own gloved hands in front of his face. He dropped to his knees, following protocol, feeling his way along the wall as the woman's cries grew fainter. That's when panic really set in. She was losing consciousness. He had maybe 2 minutes before this whole structure came down, and maybe 30 seconds before she was gone forever. "Where are you?" he shouted through his mask, his voice barely audible over the crackling destruction around him. Then he heard it, a weak tapping sound coming from behind what he realized was a bedroom door. The handle was already too hot to touch, even through his protective gloves. He used his axe to smash through, and that's when he saw her. Before we continue this incredible story, comment below where you're watching from right now. This single dad's life is about to change in ways he never imagined. She was curled in the corner, unconscious, her dark hair spread across the floor like spilled ink. Beautiful, even covered in soot and smoke. Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, feeling how light she was, how fragile, and began the most terrifying 30 seconds of his career. The ceiling above them groaned ominously as he carried her through the maze of flames and falling debris, his lungs burning despite the oxygen mask, his legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. They made out just as the second floor collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber. Marcus laid her gently on the stretcher as the paramedics took over, watching her chest rise and fall, willing her to open her eyes. She was alive, barely, but alive. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing into the night, Marcus realized he didn't even know her name. That night, he went home to his empty apartment above the firehouse and tried to forget about her. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Every time he tried to sleep, he wondered if she would make it through the night. His ex-wife Sarah had taken their 8-year-old daughter Emma to live across the country 2 years ago, claiming she couldn't handle being married to someone who risked his life for strangers every single day. Marcus had learned to live with the loneliness, had accepted that maybe some people were just meant to be alone. But something about this woman, this stranger he'd pulled from the flames, had awakened something in his chest that he thought Sarah had killed forever. 3 weeks passed. Marcus threw himself into his work, fighting fires, training rookies, anything to keep his mind off the woman with the dark hair. He never visited the hospital. He told himself it was because he'd done his job and that was enough. But the truth was, he was terrified she might not remember him, or worse, that she might, and he'd see disappointment in her eyes when she realized her hero was just a lonely middle-aged man with calloused hands and a heart full of regrets. Then came the knock on his apartment door on a rainy Thursday evening. Marcus was heating up leftover pizza, still in his uniform after a long shift, when he heard the soft tapping. He wasn't expecting anyone. His neighbors usually just called if they needed something, and Emma wasn't supposed to call until the weekend. He opened the door and felt the world stop. She was standing there in the hallway, clutching a casserole dish in her hands, looking nervous and hopeful and absolutely radiant. Her hair was clean now, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and her green eyes, God, he'd forgotten about those eyes, were bright with unshed tears. "You probably don't remember me," she started, her voice shaking slightly. "But 3 weeks ago you saved my life, and I—" "Elena Rodriguez," Marcus interrupted, surprising them both. He'd looked up her name in the incident report weeks ago, though he'd never admitted it to anyone. "I remember everything about that night." The smile that spread across her face could have powered the entire city block. "I brought you dinner," she said, lifting the casserole dish. "It's not much, but I wanted to thank you properly. The hospital food was terrible. I figured you probably don't cook much for yourself, and She was rambling now, nervous energy making her words tumble over each other like water over rocks. Would you like to come in? Marcus asked, stepping aside. His apartment was small and spartanly furnished. Just the essentials, nothing decorative or warm. A place where a man slept and ate and tried not to think too much about what his life had become. But as Elena stepped inside, looking around with curious eyes, the space suddenly felt different, warmer somehow, like sunlight had broken through clouds. If you believe that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back, hit that subscribe button now. You won't believe what Elena brought with her that night. I have something else, Elena said, setting the casserole on his small kitchen table. Her hands were trembling slightly, and Marcus noticed she kept glancing toward the door like she might run at any second. Something I should have told you at the hospital, but I was so scared and confused, and she took a deep breath. Marcus, the reason I was unconscious in that room wasn't just from the smoke. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a small white envelope, folded and worn from handling. I was unconscious because I'd taken pills. A lot of pills. That fire, it wasn't just an accident. I said myself. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sank into one of his kitchen chairs, staring at this beautiful woman who had just confessed to arson and attempted suicide in his living room. Elena, why would you? Because I had nothing left, she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. My husband had left me for his secretary. I'd lost my job at the accounting firm because of budget cuts. The bank was foreclosing on the house, that house where you found me. I was going to lose everything anyway. So I figure if I set the fire, at least the insurance money could pay off my debts and maybe leave something for my sister. I wasn't planning on surviving it. Marcus reached across the table and took her hands in his. They were cold, despite the warm evening. But you did survive. Because of you. Elena's voice was barely a whisper now. Do you know what it's like to wake up in a hospital bed and realize that someone risked their life to save yours, even when you didn't want to be saved? Do you know what it's like to look in the mirror and see someone worth saving because a stranger decided you were worth dying for? Marcus felt tears prick his own eyes. He understood hopelessness. He understood the kind of despair that made death seem like the only reasonable option. After Sarah left, taking Emma with her, there had been nights when he'd stood on his apartment balcony and wondered what would happen if he just let go. What changed? He asked. Elena smiled through her tears. You did. When I was lying in that hospital bed, I kept thinking about what you must have seen when you looked at me. Not a failure or a coward or a woman so pathetic that her own husband couldn't stand to be around her. You saw someone worth saving, someone worth risking your life for. And if you could see that, then maybe it was true. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small photograph. It showed Elena standing in front of a modest bakery, flour dusting her apron, her face glowing with pride and joy. I used the insurance money to start over. I opened a bakery downtown. It's small, but it's mine. And every morning when I unlock that door, I think about the man who gave me a second chance at life. Marcus stared at the photograph, then at Elena's face, radiant with hope and determination. That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. There's more, Elena said, her voice growing stronger now. I've been coming by the firehouse every day for 2 weeks, but you're never there during visiting hours. The guys, Captain Rodriguez and that sweet young one with the freckles, they told me you work double shifts most days because you don't have anywhere else to be. They're worried about you, Marcus. They think you're as lost as I was, just in a different way. Before Marcus could respond, Elena was opening that worn white envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper. This is why I'm really here. This is what I should have given you 3 weeks ago. She handed him the paper, and Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. It was a check made out to him for $50,000. Elena, I can't accept this. I was just doing my job. No, you weren't. Her voice was firm now, stronger than he'd heard it all evening. You went into that burning house before backup arrived. You risked your life for a complete stranger. Captain Rodriguez told me that's what you always do, that you've saved more lives in the city than anyone can count, and you've never asked for anything in return. But I'm not giving you money as payment, Marcus. I'm giving it to you as an investment. Marcus looked up from the check, confused. An investment in what? In us. The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. Elena's cheeks were flushed, but her gaze was steady, unflinching. What happens next will absolutely shock you. But first, common hope if you believe in second chances for broken people. I know this sounds crazy, Elena continued, words tumbling out in a rush. I know we barely know each other. But Marcus, I've thought about you every single day since that night. Not just because you saved my life, though I'll never stop being grateful for that, but because when I was unconscious, trapped in that burning room, I had this dream. Or maybe it was a vision, I don't know. But I dreamed about a man with kind eyes and strong hands who would pull me out of the darkness. Not just from the fire, but from everything. The loneliness, the despair, the feeling that I didn't matter to anyone. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Elena, I know about Emma, she said softly. Captain Rodriguez mentioned that you have a daughter who lives far away. I know about the divorce, about how your wife left because she couldn't handle being married to a hero. I know you think you're supposed to be alone, that maybe you deserve to be alone, because you chose a job that scares people. But you don't. You deserve to be loved, Marcus. You deserve someone who sees your courage as a gift, not a curse. Marcus stared at her. This incredible woman who had walked into his life carrying casseroles and confessions, and a check that represented more money than he'd ever seen at one time. What are you saying? I'm saying let's use this money to visit Emma. I'm saying let's take a chance on something beautiful and terrifying and completely insane. I'm saying that maybe two broken people can put each other back together in ways that make them both stronger than they ever were alone. Elena stood up and walked around the table, stopping directly in front of Marcus's chair. She took his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing along his cheekbones. I'm saying I think I'm falling in love with my guardian angel, and I'm hoping maybe he might consider falling for the woman whose life he saved. Marcus felt something break open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 2 years. Without thinking, he pulled Elena into his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist, breathing in the scent of her hair, vanilla and smoke and hope. I was so scared to come here tonight, Elena whispered against his neck. I thought maybe you'd think I was crazy or desperate or... I think you're the bravest person I've ever met, Marcus interrupted, pulling back to look into her eyes. I think you're extraordinary. And I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you curled up in that burning room, fighting to stay alive. They kissed then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Marcus tasted tears on Elena's lips, his or hers. He couldn't tell, and felt the last of his defenses crumble. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the next emergency call, or the next fire, or the next person who might need saving. He was thinking about this woman in his arms, this miraculous second chance at happiness. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. So, what do you say, Firefighter? Ready for another rescue mission? What kind of rescue mission? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. The kind where we save each other. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the backyard of Elena's small house behind the bakery, watching his daughter Emma chase Elena's new puppy around the garden. The check had paid for plane tickets and a custody modification that let Emma spend summers in city. It had paid for a ring that Elena wore proudly on her left hand, and for a honeymoon to Ireland where they both always dreamed of going. But more than that, it had paid for therapy sessions that helped them both understand that sometimes the people we're meant to love come into our lives in the most unexpected ways. It had paid for hope. Daddy, Emma called, running toward him with the puppy in her arms. Elena says we can name him Hero, because that's what you are. Marcus caught his daughter in his arms, spinning her around as she giggled. Over her shoulder, he saw Elena standing in the doorway of their home, flower on her apron, a smile on her face that could have lit up the entire city. That night, as Elena slept beside him, Marcus thought about the fire on Maple Street. He thought about how many times he'd run into burning buildings, never knowing which rescue might change his life forever. He'd saved dozens of people over the years, but Elena was right. She had saved him right back. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that our darkest moments can lead to our most beautiful beginnings. Sometimes the people who need rescuing the most are the ones doing the rescuing. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, he made a promise to himself and to the woman sleeping peacefully in his arms. He would never stop being grateful for the fire that brought them together. He would never stop fighting for their love the same way he fought fires, with everything he had, fearlessly, completely. Because sometimes love doesn't knock politely on your door. Sometimes it comes crashing through your life like smoke and flames and a woman with a casserole dish and a heart brave enough to believe in second chances. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person you save ends up saving you right back.